Hi folks, my name is Jason, the Samuel Zwemer Theological Seminary, and I'm going to share with you today about systematic theology and what systematic theology book can we use, which is the best one for pastors, elders and deacons. I'm also going to talk about just being a Christian and what theology books to read as a Christian, and also what theology books or how to teach theology in seminary level. The experience that I have is I've studied at the Nazarene Theological Seminary for 4 years in Manchester, Didsbury. I also studied for a few years at MA level at Luther King House in Manchester with Manchester University. And I've been able to look at other theological seminaries around the country over the years, and so I've been able to glean some idea of how theological education has been going in the UK, and it might be a help wherever you are around the world for me to pass on some of the ideas that I have. Well, let's start first just to say that it's really good to see you. I'm really pleased to be here today with you, and I hope what I have to say will be a real help to you. So first of all, let's take you're a Christian, and maybe you're a new Christian, or maybe you're a Christian and you've been a Christian a while, but you want to have a good foundation of Christian theology and you don't know where to start and where to go. Well, I would recommend the 1689 Baptist Confession of Faith. You might not agree with everything on it, but the Baptist Confession of Faith of 1689, you can get this published by Wakeman at Dr. Peter Masters' Metropolitan Tabernacle, and you can get it for £2, and this will give you an overview of Christian theology, and it's quite profound. Your effectual calling, justification, sanctification, the law, marriage, civil magistrates, etc. But this is a brilliant introduction to Christian theology. Like I said, you might not agree with everything, but it will give you a good grounding and help you to think through issues. So I would recommend that. Another book that I would recommend you get, I don't know if it's published now, but you could get a second-hand copy. It's In Understanding Being Men by T.C. Hammond. T.C. Hammond, In Understanding Being Men, published by IVP. This is an old copy of InterVarsity Fellowship, Varsity Fellowship, but they changed the name to IVP. So if you could get hold of T.C. Hammond, In Understanding Being Men, this is written by I think an Anglican Reformed guy, and he gives a really good synopsis of the Bible teaching of theology and tells you the history of theology in each subject, and it's very crisp, very clear, very simple, but covers a lot of ground. So that's In Understanding Being Men by T.C. Hammond. For those who've got a bit more time and just want to read a bit more and chew over issues a bit more, another introduction to theology is a Manual of Theology by D.L. Dagg. D.L. Dagg, Manual of Theology, and Reformed Baptist guy, published by Gango Books or Sprinkle Publications. You can get that at the Metropolitan Tabernacle in London, where Spurgeon was the minister, for quite cheaply. So that's Manual of Theology, J.L. Dagg, and I'll put the references underneath the YouTube. Now that's a very spiritual book, but it needs a bit more working on. So that's if you're a Christian. Those are some books that you could start to read as a young Christian, chewing over, or as a Christian who wants to get some foundation in their Christian life. Another good book you could get hold of by the Banner of Truth is The Way of Life by by Charles Hodge. The Way of Life by Charles Hodge, Banner of Truth. It's a really good introduction to Christian theology. You can get it on our seminary website. If you go to the seminary website, Samuel Zwemer Theological Seminary, Zwemer Youth, you should be able to get that book for free download there, and that gives you a general outline of Christian theology. Okay, now for the big guns. What is the best? If if you're a pastor or a preacher, let's just look at the time. What is the best systematic theology book that you could get hold of? Well, there are a number of books on the market that you can get. You could get hold of Berkhof's Systematic Theology, published by the Banner of Truth. It's a good. It has some good it's biblical content, and he looks at philosophical ideas, but refers it back to the Bible. I don't particularly get much out of Berkhof. I think it's a bit dry. It's a bit wooden. So I wouldn't recommend Louis Berkhof, but I would recommend that you look at him sometimes. But I wouldn't recommend that as a preacher or as a pastor to have that book. I think what I would recommend, if you're a preacher, two books. What I think are the best systematic theology books around. This is, in my view, the best systematic theology books around. Of everything, I think every preacher would do well to have these books, and will get a lot of sustenance and strength in their preaching, in their pastoral care. The first book is John Calvin's Christian Institutes. Now you might say, oh no, Jay, you're not one of these Calvinists, but hear me out. John Calvin's Christian Institutes, published by Henry Beveridge. Get Henry Beveridge translation. So you'll have to look up on Amazon where you can get how you can get this. Henry Beveridge, Institutes of Christian Religion by John Calvin. This book is a fantastic book. It's so spiritual. A lot of systematic theology books, they're very dry and arid, even the evangelical ones. But this book is always packed with spiritual power, but it's practical, it's deep, and it's rich. And I would encourage you, and all the heresies that you find today, Calvin's dealt with them in his book. I would recommend John Calvin for every preacher, Arminian or Calvinist, will get a lot of blessing out of this Calvin's Institutes. So I would recommend every preacher get a copy of that, and pastor. The second book I would recommend is Herman Bavinck's 4-volume Dogmatics. Now I've only got Our Reasonable Faith by Herman Bavinck, published by Erdman Publishing. Our Reasonable Faith by Herman Bavinck, by Erdman Publishing. But he's done just recently, there's been a translation of his 4 volumes Dogmatics. You can get it at Amazon. As far as I'm concerned, that is the best systematic theology book that you could get hold of. Why? Well, first of all, it's spiritual like Calvin. Secondly, it's saturated with scripture. Thirdly, he deals with all the philosophical issues of his time, but he does it in such a simple way that it's spiritual, it's not dry or arid. So I would recommend Herman Bavinck, Dutch Reform guy, top man, the best systematic theology book that you could get hold of. 4-volume Dogmatics. If you're a young seminary student, you need to get hold of that. It'll cost you 60 quid, $80 or whatever, but it'll be a lifetime investment. If you're a pastor or a preacher, get hold of it. It will renew you, strengthen you, enrich you. It'll be a mighty blessing. Now, I'm going to just, if I've got time, just share 1 or 2 other books that you might like to get hold of. Another good systematic theology book is Wayne Grudem by IVP. He's a Baptist guy. He's really, really spiritual. He's not as profound as Bavinck, but he's very, very spiritual, biblical guy. You might not agree with him on his views on the gifts of the Spirit, but generally speaking, it's a really, really good book for building you up in the faith as a pastor or as a preacher. Really, really good book to get hold of. If you're a seminary student or a seminary professor, a theology book that you could get hold of is Dogmatic Theology by William T. Shedd. William T. Shedd. Dogmatic Theology, published by Presbyterian and Reformed Publishing. Now, why, as a seminary student, why as a professor is an acute philosopher. He's really good at philosophy. So when you read this book, you're reading biblical theology, but you're reading a man who knows how to deal with philosophy, and it will help you as a seminary professor and as a theologian and as a seminary student. Another good book of theology is Dr. Robert L. Raymond. Dr. Robert L. Raymond, New Systematic Theology of the Christian Faith, published by Thomas Nelson Publishers. Excellent book. It's very strong again on biblical foundations. It's full of the Bible. It's not particularly strong in looking at heresies of the time, but he is strong in having a reason for epistemology of why we believe the things that we believe. He is strong on that, and he goes into detail at the beginning of his systematic theology. But that's a really, really spiritual, practical book. Dr. Robert L. Raymond, New Systematic Theology of the Christian Faith, published by Thomas Nelson. That's well worth an investment. I would get Bavinck, but if you can't afford Bavinck, get Dr. Robert L. Raymond, A New Systematic Theology of the Christian Faith. A golden oldie is Systematic Theology by Charles Hodge, published by Eerdmans. It's a good book. I enjoy Hodge, but it'll take a long time to read and to chew over. So I would look up that if you're doing essays. When you can afford it, get hold of it, but get Bavinck first. But a really good book, 3 volumes, Systematic Theology by Charles Hodge. Very good at looking at the history of theology. But what if you're not Reformed? Because all those were Reformed books. I'll just check the time. Sorry for this. Just got a couple of minutes left. If you're not Reformed and you're an Arminian, the best systematic theology book you can get as an Arminian is A Compendium of Christian Theology by a chap called William Burt Pope. William Burt Pope, A Compendium of Christian Theology. I don't think it's in print today. It might be. But get Pope if you're an Arminian and you're looking for a systematic theology book, because Pope goes into a critical analysis of German theology, and he's quite profound in his own way, and that will help you. It's very similar to Charles Hodge, but from an Arminian side, and that will help you if you're an Arminian preacher, a Methodist preacher. You need to get hold of Pope, because he'll bless your socks. He's a very godly man. I recommend that. If you're an Anglican pastor, preacher, I would encourage you to get hold of Principles of Theology by William Griffith Thomas. Principles of Theology by William Griffith Thomas, and it's an exposition of the 39 articles. You'll have to get that on Google Archive. Okay, so that's the Principles of Theology, an introduction to the 39 articles, William H. Griffith Thomas. Hope that's a blessing to you. I'll write down the references for you so you can get them. So we've got a few seconds left. Basically, if you're a seminary professor and you're teaching theology, one of the great weaknesses at the moment in teaching theology is it's not grounded in practice. So I would encourage every person who's teaching theology at the moment to make sure you get your students to think practically how their theology is working, because you'll find that a lot of theology today in seminaries and whenever it's taught doesn't actually work it out. How does it actually work out in real life and in practice? So yeah, we need solid biblical foundations, but how is it working out in our lives and in practice? Okay, hope that's a blessing to you. So God bless you.